cloudy, wishing me heart it was Sunday. Drinking wine and beer all the week, time for whiskey on a Sunday.
Hello everyone. You are all very welcome to join me for this latest, indeed live, installment of my Instagram series, Whiskey on a Sunday, with me, Psalm for All. So after a few weeks of pre-recorded segments, it is indeed good to be back live with you all once again. So now, whether you're catching this live here on Sunday evening, or if you're catching this on a replay, should you have missed out on any of my previous segments, no need to worry. You can get all caught up by visiting either my Psalm for All Facebook page, SOMM 4ALL, or you can visit my Psalm for All YouTube channel. So now, it's nearing the end of February, and as we begin to creep up on the month of March, which we all know is the month of the Irish, it's more than a little apropos that I'm going to be talking about and showcasing Scotland's Auchentoshan 12 single malt whiskey tonight. But, as always, before I begin, I need to ask anyone watching who may not yet be of legal age to purchase and or consume alcohol where they live. If that's the case for you, then you now need to say goodbye. All right. Let's start. First, let's talk a little bit about the name, Auchentoshan. Fair being fair, it's a bit of a mouthful to say and pronounce. Its origin derives from Scotch Gaelic and means corner of the field. So let's say it all together, Auchentoshan. There you go. Say that 3 times fast, take a shot. If you're still standing and you can still talk, then you know you're doing something right. Okay, so Auchentoshan, the distillery itself, is located in the northeast of Glasgow, on the outskirts of Clydebank. And, the Auchentoshan distillery is often referred to as Glasgow's single malt, due to its proximity to the city of Glasgow. Now, Auchentoshan is only one of about 6 active Scottish whiskies distilleries that are left in the region called the Lowlands. And I've talked about those different regions in Scotland in previous episodes. So now the Lowlands, again, there's about 6 active distilleries there present day, although that was once an area that was a thriving hub for whiskey production. But as the years passed on, global instances that I've talked about before, such as US Prohibition and World War II, those things all took its toll, and we're left with now 6 in the Lowlands. So Auchentoshan, or Auchie, as it's affectionately known, it has a very interesting history, or so I think. You let me know after the end of this episode if you think it's interesting or not. It began its life in 1823. Now, as to who actually started it, there's a bit of discussion on that one. Some folks say it was an engineer from Greenock who first owned it back in 1823. There's others that say it was actually a group of Irish immigrants that were originally behind the creation of the distillery, or at least behind the first type of distillation that may have occurred at the site where Auchentoshan is now. Perhaps as early as 1800 for those Irish immigrants. And yes, folks, Auchie indeed has some Irish influence, which for me makes it a great choice to start what I'm going to call whiskey walk-up to the month of March and to St. Patrick's Day. So now you see the eastern edge of the Scottish Lowlands, that's really only 13 miles off the easternmost coast of Ireland. So, back in the late 1700s and early 1800s, lots of the Irish made the trek across the water because it wasn't very far, and they did so in search of work, largely at that time as seasonal farm workers in Scotland. And largely they settled, but not only, in the Lowlands region. So to say that the original ownership may have been, Irish immigrants, that does make some sense if that is true, indeed true. Other Irish influences with Auchentoshan? Well, there's the style of Auchentoshan. In the teasers that I did on social media leading up to today's installment, I've mentioned Irish influence. And no, I wasn't referring actually to the possible Irish owners or possible Irish creators of the distillery. What I meant was how it's made. You see, Auchie is triple distilled, extremely unique for modern day Scottish whiskey, but also almost synonymous with Irish whiskey. Now, that being said, before anyone gets too excited and starts yelling at me or sends me notes on social media, I do want to be clear. Now, there is no law stating that Irish whiskey must indeed be triple distilled. And truthfully, there are more than a few Irish distilleries making double distilled Irish whiskey. However, in the 17 and 1800s, almost every Irish whiskey at the time was triple distilled, and since then it's kind of became the signature of Irish whiskey styles. Triple distillation Irish whiskey back in that day was light with sweet malty and floral notes, and people around the world back then absolutely loved it. Irish whiskey was so popular in those times that, again, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, the Scots largely tried to copy it. Irish whiskey in the 17 and 1800s could be sold for 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 times as much as other whiskeys, including Scottish whiskeys. So, folks, in the end, money talks. Now, when the column still was invented in 1831, and again, talked about that previously, won't get into it now, but the column still was a different way of distilling. When that came about, the Scottish distillers largely migrated towards it, as it allowed for a much cheaper method of producing whiskey, and it also meant that cheaper grains could be used in place of the more expensive and at the time more heavily taxed malted barley. I also said the Irish didn't go that route. Now, with regards to the Scotch, I did say that they largely migrated, right? Quote unquote, largely migrated. Some Scottish distillers still chose to remain true to the original recipes that they had, and they chose to stay the course with triple distillation, which again was the norm back at the time. Auchentoshan, our friend Auchie here, they were one of those people that said we're going to stay true to the recipe and true to triple distillation, and they remain that way to today. Right now, they're the only Scottish distillery to use triple distillation exclusively throughout their brands. So Irish influence aside, the Auchentoshan distillery, they had great success early on from the start. In 1823, when they started, right through to 1878, and in that short period of time, it not only changed ownership, but was producing at the time about 50,000 gallons of whiskey a year. So, they were doing pretty well. Now, the distillery itself would change ownership several more times, ending with Morrison Bowmore, which really is Beam Suntory, because that's who owns Morrison Bowmore, and those are the folks that own it today. And along the way, with all these ownership changes and its history, the distillery would also get bombed. Yes, folks, I said bombed, and I don't mean in terms of, alcohol consumption, I mean literally bombed. Between March 13th and March 15th, back in 1941, I believe, the German Luftwaffe bombers air raided or blitzed, whichever way you want to call it, the whole Clydeside and Glasgow regions of Scotland. Now, it's thought of and it's said that the targets by those German raiders were actually the armament factories that were helping produce things for the Allied forces during World War II. But regardless of what their targets were, there were other building casualties, along with over 500 people, sadly, that were killed, and again, sadly, over 1,000 people seriously injured. In addition to all of that, with regards to Auchentoshan itself, during that air raid, a warehouse was hit, and thousands of gallons of whiskey was sent flowing into the Clyde River. Now, if you were to visit the distillery today, you'll be able to see what they call the distillery pond. And that pond was actually created from a bomb crater that was left behind after this blitz. Okay, so I know you're all enjoying a history lesson. And truthfully, when it comes to history with whiskey, it's one of the aspects that I really, really love. But I also know that you're sending me telepathic notes to get the actual whiskey tasting started. I can feel the vibes coming through. And I hear you. And folks, we're almost there. A few quick points just before we dive in. Now, I already said that the whiskey is triple distilled, like Irish whiskey largely is. It's also aged, though, in some ex-sherry casks. Again, like a lot of Irish whiskeys are. Doesn't mean they have to be, but a lot of Irish whiskeys are. Now, that being said, truthfully, Auchentoshan here also does see time in ex-bourbon casks, so American oak, ex-bourbon casks. But again, there's definitely at least a nod to Ireland, if not more, with our friend Auchie here. Also, this is an unpeated, so no peat at all whatsoever, unpeated 12-year single malt whiskey. So, single malt, that tells us that it's been produced at a single distillery, that it's made from 100% malted barley, that it's made via pot stills, right? Not the column still I was talking about earlier, it has to be pot still, and that it's also been bonded in a warehouse located in Scotland. In this case, that warehouse is at the distillery itself. This Auchentoshan 12 has also been chill filtered. Now, I talked about that process in last week's episode, and essentially that's a process that's done before bottling, which helps to stabilize the whiskey and to remove any teeny tiny microscopic bits that may have gotten through the original filtering. Again, see the episode on Deanston's last week for more details on chill filtering. Additionally, our Auchentoshan here, he's had a little bit of coloring agent, E150A, that I've talked about before. Now, just a reminder, that additive is allowed by Scottish whisky law. It's tasteless, it's odorless, and really it's largely done for two reasons. Either to give a darker color to the whiskey, and I'm saying Somme for All says to try and fake out people when there's no age statement on the bottle, to give you the sense that it's a little older. But in the case of Auchentoshan here, they're using it, and they're only using a little bit, and it's really to create a singularity and consistency through the bottles and all the batches. Again, not much is used here. With 12 years of aging, you're going to get some natural dark coloring from the wood, so they use a teeny bit just to make sure that every bottle looks the same. Not a big deal. Okay, right. Finally, now time to taste. I know, right? Finally. Okay, here we go. So 40% alcohol by volume, so this is not a big, boozy, heavy whiskey. Color, that's almost an amber gold, to be quite honest. I'm not sure how well that will come through, but that's amberish in my book. Now we do our 1, 2, 3 to acclimatize our nose. So we greet our whiskey. We go, hello there. Nice to meet you. Hope you smell delicious. And now our nose is ready. We go in, one big sniff. So what do we get? I'm getting sweet citrus and some soft oak popping out for me right away. Getting some sherry notes. So by that I mean dried fruit, so some dried fig, some sultana raisin maybe. I'm getting citrus again, orange, tangerine is coming back to me. Getting a little tropical note in here. So, like a really ripe mango or maybe a little bit of guava. Some floral notes in here. And there's a bit of a green leaf note, but it's almost like a spearmint, kind of minty kind of note, but very, very soft. And then some nuttiness. Marzipan, almond, honey, cereals coming through. Some sweet barley would make sense, single malt, 100% malted barley, of course. A little bit of vanilla, a little bit of creme brulee, and then some spices, a little bit of cinnamon, some nutmeg definitely, and a little dry wood. Very, very nice nose, at least for me. And folks, when I'm talking about sweet notes, I'm talking about natural sweet notes, right? I'm not talking about overly sugary, cloying things or caramel or toffee or those dense sweet notes. I'm talking more natural sweet notes. Okay, so we go in on the palate. We always want to remember, we want to swish it around, get all of our flavor receptors firing. Sláinte. Coat all those 5 flavor receptors. Okay, what do we think? Immediately, it's very soft and it's light. I wouldn't go as far as saying it's delicate, but definitely soft and light. And on the tongue, it's a little viscous. So, a little oily, but in a good way. A little slippery. On the palate, tasting orange citrus popping out, vanilla's coming through, a little bit of salty mineral, keeping everything nice and fresh in there. Spices popping out, so that cinnamon's coming through. A little bit of white pepper on the tip of my tongue. And then a little bit of brown sugar, but like raw brown sugar, not cooked or caramelized, just straight up raw brown sugar. Some floral notes on the palate. Orange blossoms, one of the things that comes to mind. And now I'm getting some tropical that's kind of popping in. Maybe a little bit of passion fruit. Sweet notes, custardy a bit now coming through. Dry cedar, dry wood, dry oak. Yeah, those barrel notes coming through. Very easy on the palate, in my opinion. And a bit of an amusement ride as well, to be quite honest. Well, maybe more like a kiddie ride. But I like the way that the tones change, and I like that up and down cascading effect that the flavors have on the palate. The finish, it's pretty straightforward. It's clean, fairly crisp, and just a touch of that sweet sherry and vanilla and oak coming through. What do I think? What's my assessment? Big word for a Sunday. In case you haven't guessed, I really like it. Although, let's be fair, folks. Given my penchant for most Irish whiskies, the fact that I like my buddy Auchie here, that shouldn't be much of a surprise to anyone who either knows me or who has been following along throughout my Whiskey on a Sunday series. Just being honest. Okay, so enough about me. If you, and that's what this is all about, if you liked how I've described Auchentoshan 12, what I've smelled, what I've tasted, how it feels in the palate, so if you like all that, and if you live in Ontario, you can pick up a bottle at the LCBO, stock number 107359, $60.95 Canadian for a 750 milliliter bottle. Pretty fair value for a 12-year-old, right? This has an age statement on it. This is a 12-year-old single malt. So I think, in my opinion, that's pretty fair. For my US friends, I've seen this listed on websites between $48 and $60 USD. So you may want to shop around a little bit. Yeah. So there you go. Scotland's own Auchentoshan 12, Lowlands single malt Scottish whiskey. Very similar to Irish whiskey. Sorry, Scottish whiskey. Yeah, it's Scottish whiskey, right? Right, okay. But you know what, honestly, all kidding aside, it is pretty easy to get confused with this guy because of the similarities. And that's a good point. If you're a novice whiskey drinker or you're a new whiskey drinker and you're someone who has perhaps stayed within that realm of lighter, easy drinking Irish whiskeys, that's part of the appeal of Irish whiskeys, then if that's you, and you want to expand and you want to push your whiskey palate and your whiskey horizons a little bit, then Auchentoshan may be a good place for you to go to next. Now that being said, always a good idea to try a wee dram, first maybe in a bar, in a pub, or better yet, at a friend's place, so it doesn't cost you too much. But again, only please do these things when it is safe and recommended to do so. Right, okay. So, essentially, that's a wrap on this installment of Whiskey on a Sunday with me, Psalm for All. Now, folks, whether you're watching this live here on Instagram tonight or whether you're catching it on video replay, again, either on my Facebook page or on my YouTube channel, I want to sincerely thank you for spending some time with me. I do hope you've enjoyed my look at Auchentoshan 12, and I do hope to see you all next week, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, live again here on Instagram. And I'm going to be trekking back next week to Ireland for a look and taste of more Irish whiskies. I mean, come on, folks. The countdown's on. We've 30 days to St. Patrick's Day. We got to get our Irish going. So until next week, please, everyone, be safe, stay well. Birthday wishes to my dad, Joe. And to everyone else, cheers from Psalm for All.